Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and today I want to talk about color, but not in the way that I usually talk about it. One of the things about us as photographers is just by the nature of the technology that we use, we're usually always shooting in color. But that doesn't mean that we're actually seeing and using the color to the best effect. Color is sort of this automatic thing that we perceive, and when we're making our compositions, we are often focused primarily on light, or contrast, or pattern, or the subject itself, or background, but we're not thinking of color in terms of it being an important element in the shot, just like anything with respect to composition would be. And I chose 3 images that allow me to sort of highlight this idea. Okay, first we have this image by Kevin Balance. I don't think we have any XF information here. So this is a wonderful image of this moment of this ball being thrown in. I'm assuming that it's being thrown in this child's direction because of sort of the defensive posture that he's in this shot. Now graphically, this is a really interesting image. We have all these lines that are sort of leading us directly to the subject, especially the shadow here and of the boy who I assume has thrown the ball. The placement of the ball is wonderful, as is the shadow here with just enough separation between here and the wall. So if you look at this image graphically, it's a very strong shot. Lighting is there, contrast is there, but look at what's happening with the color, particularly the red of the towel that the boy there is trying to protect himself with. Here, that color is so important to the success of the image. It serves as a really strong graphic anchor. There's a lot of graphic stuff, lines and shapes and lighting that are helping us to lead us to that boy. But it's that red that really sort of serves as a punctuation for everything else that happens here. Imagine if that red were elsewhere in the frame. At that point, that red might be a big distraction. If, for example, there was something here that was red, that had that punchy red that we're seeing here, this frame might be exactly the same, but that red placed elsewhere in the frame would all of a sudden be in competition with the main subject of the shot, which is the boy. And when you think about using color or seeing color, I think it's oftentimes that you can lose sight of the fact that color is even present, because the moment here is so dramatic and it's so strong graphically that realizing that the color is there can sometimes come as an afterthought. And that's something that I have to sort of remind myself when I'm out there shooting, because even though you'll see a lot of my images on Instagram and on my website are in black and white, the initial images are always in color. And sometimes I have to really sort of pay attention to the role that color is playing with a subject and within a scene, and how that color is interacting with all the various elements that exist within the frame. Because you can have images where it's a wash in color. Color is everywhere, but it becomes it confuses you as to where to look, because you'll have these reds, these yellows, these greens, you'll have these muted colors, you'll have these saturated colors that pervade the entire frame. And it confuses the viewer in terms of, okay, what's supposed to be the focal point of my attention? And I think this shot by Kevin really succeeds in being able to use not only the red, but also the green of the fence on the right, serving as a counterpoint to the red. And even the colors of the ball, the blue, the red, the yellow, that pervade the ball, they're just a nice point of contrast to this uniform wall. And thankfully, this wall has a nice pattern. I like the fact that there's a pattern there, because the shadows help break up the pattern. We've talked about that before. And even though this shot isn't about pattern in and of itself, it's really about the moment. Those things that we've talked about before in terms of paying attention to pattern and trying to find a way to break pattern in order for it to be interesting is at play here, even though it's a secondary element in the photograph. So all of these things, color, shape, pattern, all of these things that can normally be sort of secondary to a shot, can all of a sudden rise to prominence. But what the idea is that you want to be aware of all of these things as secondary elements, because there are going to be times when it's going to be elevated to the primary element of the shot. And it's important to be aware of all these things, but especially color. Here's a shot by Mahesh Balasubramanian. This was shot with a Canon 5D Mark III at 1/1600th of a second at f/16, ISO 640. So again, this is a very sort of graphic shot. So let's not even take a look at the color immediately. You can see that these figures are really cleanly defined against the blue sky. You got some great body language by each of the characters in the frame. Not only the person on the far left who's pointing, but also just the body language of the men as they're standing there, either with their hands on their hips or they're crossed. And I have that figure there at near the bottom of the frame here at the center, who's sort of in these dark clothes that serves as a contrast to these men who are dressed in these more white or off-white pieces of clothing. And I'm just noticing here, you have a figure here at the very bottom whose body language is the same as these men here for whatever reason. I think it's probably more coincidence more than sort of anything else. Graphically, this shot is just really, really remarkable. And you could easily think about this shot being a great black and white, but it's the color that really sort of serves as a nice flourish to the overall scene, because the color of these turbans, these head wraps, are so prominent and they're so key. And again, like the other shot, it's serving as a point of contrast, right? So you have these saturated orange and red turbans in contrast with the blue, and they also help just to create a really nice flow, because the colors are linking all of these men together. Though they're light clothing, and the fact that they're all dressed very similarly sort of implies a connection. There is something about the fact that they're wearing the same sort of head adornment in the same sort of color that makes you just flow throughout the frame in a really, really lovely way. I mean, if you can imagine this image without the color, I think it still would be an interesting image just because of the gesture, the lines, just the whole flow of the image. But that color just adds a wonderful flourish to all the things that make this shot really, really striking. And one of the things that you can do in order to sort of perceive color is by paying attention to the light and looking at how it renders color in a scene. Here you're dealing with some direct light, and it's coming from the side, so it's probably either early in the morning or the late afternoon. And the light hits, you can really see it on this person's face, how the light just beautifully illuminates his face and his mustache, but you can see how it just hits the turban here, and here, and it makes the color pop. You can see here in this area of shade where the light is not directly illuminating their clothing, how the color saturation just drops. And there's just a little bit of orange here. I'm not sure if this is a strap to something, so it looks like this color is the same as this. Or even you just look at the turban here, and you can see how the color looks so differently as a result of not being illuminated by the direct sunlight. And one of the things that I do when I'm out there and I'm shooting and I'm looking, I'm not only looking at light and shadow, because I'm always looking for that kind of contrast whenever possible, but I'm also observing how the light affects color, because that usually is my first cue as to whether color can be made to be an important element of my overall composition. You know, when you're going out there in a busy scene, which I imagine this was with a lot of people, you can get so overwhelmed by all the stimuli that, you know, all the synapses are firing simultaneously, and you don't know where to start, and you don't know where to look first. Well, for me, to sort of slow things down, I'll just stop, and I'll just look and observe what's happening with the light. Where's the shadow? What's it doing to color? And usually just looking at those qualities of the scene reveal to me so much. And I think that Mahesh here does just a wonderful job in making a really wonderful shot where color is really the anchor of the image. Okay, here's an image by Kostas Katsouris. This was made with a Samsung 310 at a shutter speed of 1/17th of a second, f1.9, and ISO 800. Now, what I like about this shot is that it's shot under the worst kind of lighting conditions probably imaginable, right? How many times have you gone indoors to a club or a restaurant and the light is just piss poor, and you put away the camera and you just sort of disregard the idea of even making a photograph? And if you do make a photograph, you're probably popping on the flash in order to get the subject of your photograph well illuminated. But here, Kostas does a remarkable thing by just allowing color itself to be the subject matter of the shot. This is very different from the first two shots, where it's the action, either the gesture in the man in the second shot or the ball being thrown in the first shot, where the moment itself, this dramatic moment of this action, this gesture, is the reason for the photograph. And that color is sort of an important flourish to the shot. In this shot, you don't have that. In this shot, it's the color, especially the color contrast between the red and the blue that serve as the heart of the image. The people here who are silhouetted are secondary elements. They're here to serve as a counterpoint to the quality of the light and the color of the light. They provide a context. They provide a sense of place. Even though we can't identify who these people are, we can get a sense because of the light, especially this sort of ray of light that's coming through here, and that these people are in some sort of social gathering. And by the look of the lights, I think most of us would assume that it's sort of a club. But here, the color is the reason for the image. Sometimes in low light conditions like this, you're kind of breaking all the rules, because as you can see, the shutter speed and the ISO and the aperture are pretty wide, because you have to allow a lot of light in order to get a decent shot. And the shot's not going to be sharp. I mean, shooting at 1/7 of a second is going to be really, really hard. Not only are you going to contend with camera shake, but you're going to deal with the movement of the people. But for this shot, it's not about that. It's about the mood. It's about the feeling of the moment, not so much having a sharp, well-defined photograph. Because even though this wasn't shot at 250th of a second, the people are defined enough. Especially this woman here was at the sort of center of the frame, and even this person here who's using a camera phone in order to make a picture. Everything is sharp enough that you can define what these people are, but that blur really adds to the moment. And it's a shot that I would like to think that I would take, but just like a lot of you, sometimes we enter a situation where we think, oh, it's not going to deliver a good photograph because the light's too poor, because my shutter speed is going to be too slow, or for whatever excuse it is. And sometimes it's just fun to just play and just go, even though it may not deliver what I usually expect from a photograph, let me go ahead and try to make a photograph anyway and see what happens. And I don't know what was the incentive for Kostas here to make the photograph, but this is a wonderful shot because it reminds me that, it doesn't have to be technically perfect, but if I'm observing the world in a really interesting way, and I'm paying attention in this case to color, I can produce a really interesting and exciting photograph. Hope that was helpful. I'll talk a lot about street photography here, but hopefully the principles that I'm sharing with you apply to any kind of photography that you're practicing. But if you're into street photography and you're going to be in Los Angeles on the weekend of February 4th and 5th, at LACP, the Los Angeles Center of Photography, they're having a week-long event dedicated to street photography. And on February 4th and 5th, several photographers are going to be doing presentations on street photography. So I'll be talking Matt Stewart, Rinzi Ruiz, Dana Barsoon, Michelle Groskopf, several people, John Free, several people who have been on the Candid Frame as guests, including some others who have not been, will be speaking. And I was there last year and it was only one day. It was so successful that they spread it out over 2 days of presentations, and there's a whole week of stuff that's happening as well. And you can check it out by visiting lacphoto.org. And if you're found us and you've never heard of the Candid Frame before, the Candid Frame is a podcast in which I feature conversations with some of the world's best photographers. This is an audio podcast, and it is probably one of the most unique things you'll find, because these conversations are not about equipment and gear. It's about the process and the journey of leading a photographic life. I just interviewed photographer Ali Leroy. He's a writer, a stand-up comedian, showrunner, done some amazing stuff on television and film, but he's also an avid photographer. Had a great conversation with him, and you can check it out here. And there are over 356 interviews in our archive. If you go to the website and you go down here to this link here, we have links for the free Candid Frame app for Android, Apple iOS, and Windows. It's all free, and that provides you complete access to our entire archive of interviews, so you can download them and save them and then listen to them at your convenience. And also, I'm offering some workshops on my end. I offer some one-on-one street photography workshops. I just conducted one last weekend, as well as some online critiques that are kind of online with what I've been doing here on the YouTube channel. So if you go to thecandidframe.com or Ibarionex.net, you'll be able to check it out. So thanks again for joining me. And if you like what you're seeing here, please subscribe. All right, guys. See you next time.